May the words of my mouth and the thoughts and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable unto you, O God, our strength and deliverer. Amen. Friendship is another word for hope. Before I talk on that, may I first wish all a blessed new year, the new year of the church. We as Christians, as with a few other cultures and religions and spiritualities, we get to celebrate more than one New Year's celebration. We all celebrate the 1st of January as a New Year's Day, but actually we as Christians, the church year starts with the beginning of Advent. And so a blessed new year to you. We start this year with a season of Advent, which is a season of anticipation. It's a season marked by anticipating Christ's coming. Now there are three broad perspectives to this anticipation of Christ's coming. The first is the nativity or birth of Christ in Bethlehem. The second is the reception of Christ in our lives and our hearts, collectively and individually. And the third perspective is what theologians would call the eschatological, or the end times, the second coming of Christ. So the nativity, Christ coming into our lives, collectively and individually in our hearts, and Christ coming again, which we heard about in the collect especially. Now there are many practices that are associated with Advent, and some of these you may be in the habit of practicing them every year when Advent comes. One of them was one that I shared with you in 2019, which is a practice of starting on the 1st of December, rather than on Advent's Day itself, the first Sunday in Advent. You read a chapter of Luke, so you start with chapter 1 on the 1st, chapter 2 on the 2nd, each day. And the magic of this is that the Gospel according to Luke has 24 chapters, so come Christmas Eve, you'll have read the whole Gospel. And you'll have really familiarized yourself with the life, the ministry, and the promises, and all things to do with Christ. Such that when the nativity, the birth of Christ, when you celebrate that, then you've refamiliarized yourself, reminded yourself, and you can recognize that as an important day, but also recognize Christ as he shows himself through the lives of others and by other means. So that's one practice. The Orthodox churches of the East have something called the Nativity Fast. So 40 days before Christmas, they have something similar to Lent. They fast, they go through habits that may be so much of a reminder of Lent as they prepare themselves for Christmas. So kind of a cleansing, repenting, etc., etc., etc. And they start this from St. Martin's Day, St. Martin's of Tours, the 11th of November, and they try to keep it to 40 days. So it becomes something of a little Lent. And that is where traditions that have taken those from the Orthodox, like some of our practice in the Anglican Church. As you can see, we don't have flowers, so and the color is purple, which is a reminder of Lent. So we do have aspects of that. That's one way of keeping Advent. And in Germanic nations, Nordic cultures, you have the Advent calendar. I know that we do practice it here as well, where each day you open a cubicle and you find a nice little gift in there. I was introduced to how big this culture can be when I lived in Norway for a number of years. And I had a friend who, because I was from South Africa, he had a tradition before meeting me. But what he had a cubicle with 24 wines, and each day he opens a cubicle as he moves towards Christmas. And when we became friends, the proportion of South African wines started growing in there. So very much in support of our economy. So that's one tradition. And then there is a tradition like we practice of the lighting of the wreath, and we started by lighting the candle of hope today. And many other traditions, Advent daily devotions, closer to Christmas, the preparation of the Christmas tree and its decoration, Christmas, the hanging of the greens and the mistletoe. When you find yourself on the mistletoe, you kiss that person that's that's nearest to you, etc., etc., etc. One that I particularly like is the tradition of the anthems, starting from the 17th to the 23rd of December, sing an anthem a day. And by just before Christmas Eve, you'll have gone through all the O anthems that kind of are a way of preparing for Christmas. There are many traditions, many ways of observing Advent. But there's something else that I guess you catch from the Gospel, the context within which this Advent is happening. Today's Gospel reading very much takes us to the cataclysms, the things that are happening, the upheavals that are happening, and within that, Christ says to them, but do not be dissuaded by these in your knowing where you should be standing. Christ talks about sufferings, wars, rumors of wars, and the Eucharistic readings before today's reading, the last week's readings in the week. They point to these as well. Plagues, lack of justice and righteousness, safety, not quite a certainty, wanting also to turn away from one's sins, like the Orthodox would do, so dealing with ourselves. And so this waiting for Christ happens in that context. And isn't it for this that Christ came into the world, to pick us out of the downward spiral and take us back to who we are supposed to be, a people made in the image and likeness of God. And so, just to simplify all of this, there are three things that he meant. On top of the three perspectives of anticipation, of the nativity, and of the waiting, anticipating Christ coming here again in our lives, and anticipating Christ coming. There's three other things, just to summarize a whole lot of these traditions and things that we go through during Advent. You could say that Advent is about anticipating Christ, a preparation of ourselves in a context where, as number three, the world might seem like it's on a downward spiral. And now doesn't it just look like there having a new variant of COVID, with the ecology not where it's supposed to be, with the challenges in the politics and the economy that we're going through, and it looks like there's no hope. And that's exactly what hope, the first candle, is needed. Anticipation, preparation, and a world that may seem to be crumbling and challenging. And in the midst of that is again this Advent wreath. I want to invite you, this is how I like to imagine it. Advent is a kind of a car, it's about anticipation. You move from one place to another. It's like a car. And as with every good car, not a huge truck, but a nice, simple sedan with four wheels. And these are the four candles, each with a theme: hope, love, peace, and joy. Starting with hope. And when you've got those wheels functioning properly, then this Advent car can then move nicely towards Christmas. And today we look at the first wheel, which is hope. Now, I did start with a statement at the beginning of this sermon to say friendship is another word for hope. Now, I didn't invent that line. It is a favorite line from one of my favorite authors, St. Howard, in his book called The Character of Virtue. He wrote this book. He's a godparent, so when his godchild was baptized, he committed himself to writing a chapter each year on virtue, on Christian living, and on moral living, and on being a good person for this child, and did that each year. And so he has 15 chapters, the 15th chapter being the year just before he was then confirmed. And in this book, he comes up with this beautiful line: faith is just, so friendship is just another word for hope. Now, we had in the reading, the first reading, David being promised by, or rather, there's a promise of a covenant. That there's one who will be born from the branch of Jesse. And that is the promise, but it's also the covenant. We heard it in the hymn that we read, that friendship and covenant are pretty much the same word. Covenant is much less like a contract and much more like a good, deep, trustworthy friendship. And so when we say friendship, when he says friendship is another word for hope, what he says is covenant, a deep relationship with one another, gives us hope. And just to keep it simple, I'm sure we've all had good and bad friendships. Have you noticed how when you're in trouble and you have one good friend, how that gives you hope, kind of recharges you? When you're in a difficult situation, the first person that you want to call is a good friend. Those who make friendships in times of war, or those who may be veterans of different kinds, they'll tell you the importance of friendship when faced even with death and the roaring guns. Just finding a good friend, that in itself instills hope. And I think that's what St. Albans means by this line. When you have a friend, you just have this confidence that there's something good, there's something still peaceable, there's something that can come good that can come out of this. Even if it doesn't now, a good friend becomes an inspiration towards hope. And so, for us to learn this theme or this virtue of hope, one good way of doing it is in finding, deepening, cultivating good friendships. And by this, I mean friendships that are trustworthy, people that you can go to, people that you know that are not going to rat you out, people, not really shallow friendships or toxic friendships, or friendships that have a lot to do with pretense, but deep ones. When you have that type of friendship, then the virtue of hope seems to just grow out of it by itself. You can face disintegrating economies, bleak futures, low levels of trust if you've got good friends. There is a thing, and I think it became more and more strong around the Fast and Furious movies, the ride or die. That's a type of friendship I'm talking about. To go through with a good friend, hope becomes natural. We need these bonds to build. We need deep fellowship. We need this harmony. We need this camaraderies. We need this comradeships, this concord with other people, so that we can have this first meal of Advent in a good place, and we start moving towards anticipation of Christ. But even deeper than that, because we are a people of a God who makes covenants with God's people, i.e. the God who wants to befriend us, no matter how much you might have disappointed God or one another, is a God who wants to be a friend of ours. We then have friendship as one of the key cornerstones of Christianity. We are invited by God, who promises us to be a friend through thick and thin. And his way of doing that is by sending his only Son, so that in partaking in the life of God's Son, we remain friends with him. Now in a moment we're going to receive the Eucharist. You remember that night when Jesus instituted the Eucharist? What did he say to his friends? He said, "From now on, you're no longer my disciples. You are my..." What did he say? Friends. I no longer call you my disciples, but I call you my friends. So every time we have the Eucharist, we are deepening, reaffirming, rebuilding, readjusting the friendship that God has already called us into. And in doing so, we are watering and nourishing the virtue of hope, even during these difficult times. Even in the face of variant Omicron, which if you haven't studied Greek, you'll probably spend all of the fourth wave trying to spread it and therefore not being in contact with other people. Just keeping you away, trying to get what this letter means. Even through that, the Eucharist, this friendship with God, this meal of a covenant, keeps hope alive. This is a God who wants to be a friend to each of us, and a friend to all of us, and thereby he sent his Son. Hence, we have Advent to look forward to the inauguration of that friendship with God. So it's true that friendship is just another word for hope. It's hope embodied. It is hope through difficult times. It is hope even in anticipation and in promise. It is a hope that carries us up. It is a hope that also keeps us accountable to one another, so that this friendship is not fake, it's not shallow, but actually calls us to say, but why did you really do that? Don't you think that things would be better this way? And so within that context of friendship, there is this element that the Orthodox pull forward quite strongly, that one can still repent and be a better person, and therefore become a bigger and better instrument of hope. And So we light this first candle here. We're going to have the Eucharist to celebrate this thing called friendship, which is just another word for hope. And isn't it hope that we need today? So we start this blessed year, this blessed church year, on this first Sunday of Advent, seeking to become better, deeper, truer, faithful, trustworthy friends to each other and with God. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.